He was the man who signed every contract, the visionary behind the billion-dollar summit, the name etched on every invite and banner. And yet, when Julian Carter walked into the hotel he had paid 6 figures to reserve, the receptionist looked him up and down and told him to wait outside. Not because of a scheduling error, not because the room wasn't ready, but because she saw a black man in a tailored suit and assumed he didn't belong. What she didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that they had just dismissed the most powerful person in the building. The sun had barely stretched over the Chicago skyline when Marcus Ellison stepped out of a sleek, jet-black Tesla Model S, its frame gleaming under the morning light like polished obsidian. A quiet storm of calm precision, Marcus adjusted the cuffs of his charcoal suit, custom-tailored in Milan, worn with the grace of a man who knew the price of every thread. There was no fanfare, no security entourage. Just him, the city, and the glass-paneled entrance of the Northcrest Grand Hotel, where today's most anticipated technology summit would unfold. He didn't walk like a man seeking approval. He walked like the reason everyone else had shown up. Yet, the moment Marcus approached the revolving doors, reality met him not with a welcome, but a wall. The valet didn't move. He glanced once, eyes barely registering Marcus before quickly shifting to the Lexus behind him. "I'll take this one," the valet muttered to a coworker, walking right past Marcus as if he were invisible. No eye contact, no greeting, nothing. Marcus gave a polite nod, but no acknowledgement followed. He reached for his own keys, parked his own car, and walked inside. It should have ended there. But what happened next would alter the course of the day, no, the future, for more than just those involved. This wasn't about a car, a conference, or a careless comment. It was about something bigger. Something many people like Marcus had carried for years. The weight of not being seen in places they built themselves to belong. Inside the lobby, a symphony of quiet elegance played out. Glass chandeliers casting fractured light, floral arrangements blooming at the corners of an endless marble floor. At the front desk stood a young receptionist, her blazer crisp, her expression neutral. Marcus approached with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove. "Good morning," he began, voice low but warm. "I'm here for the Crest Tech Summit. The Alder Room, I believe." She didn't look up. "Do you work for catering?" she asked after a long pause, still scrolling through her monitor. Marcus blinked, slowly. "No," he said, lips curling slightly in an amused exhale. "I'm Marcus Ellison, the keynote speaker, founder of Ellison Innovations." Her eyes finally lifted, but only briefly. "We're not ready yet. You'll need to wait outside." Just like that. No hesitation, no verification, no curiosity. The assumption was instant and complete. She didn't recognize his name. She didn't ask. She just saw what she thought she saw, and decided what he couldn't be. Marcus stood still for a moment, then nodded once and stepped back. He didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He simply turned and walked back through the same doors he'd entered. Outside, the city buzzed on. Taxis weaving through morning traffic, pedestrians tapping away on their phones, unaware that a storm was building behind the eyes of the man in the suit they never expected. At 8:03 a.m., a white man in a pinstripe jacket stepped out of a rideshare and entered the hotel. No badge, no name mentioned. But the receptionist stood up straight. Her smile was immediate. "Welcome, sir. Can I help you with your bags?" Marcus watched from the sidewalk as the lobby came alive for someone else. This wasn't new. It wasn't shocking. But this time, it wasn't going unnoticed. Marcus's phone buzzed. It was Kara, his head of strategy. "Morning, boss. Just checking. Are you inside yet?" He paused. "Not exactly." "Everything okay?" "They asked me to wait outside." A beat of silence. No gasp, no outrage, just quiet understanding. "I'm on my way," Kara said, her voice turning sharp. "We don't need this place." "No," Marcus said, his voice steady as ever. "Let's not move yet. I want to see something first." He ended the call. Behind him, glass doors shimmered in the morning sun, clear enough to see through, but evidently not enough to see him. What no one inside that hotel realized, what would become painfully clear within the hour, was that they hadn't just told a guest to wait outside. They'd asked the man who funded the event, the man whose name sat on every program, every invite, every contract, the man whose company employed half the speakers and had wired the AV system being tested down the hall. They'd told the summit's most powerful presence to stand on the sidewalk like an unwanted delivery man. But this wasn't the part where Marcus got angry. This was the part where he took notes. He walked back inside 10 minutes later, calm as ever, and requested to speak with the event coordinator. They said she was on her way. Marcus nodded and waited. He watched as one of his board members was greeted with smiles and ushered upstairs, champagne offered before check-in. He saw his company logo flashing across LED screens in the hallways. And yet, he remained unrecognized, unwelcomed, unacknowledged. Until they were ready to learn who he was. Not from his voice, not from his posture, but from the collapse that followed. Because some lessons aren't taught with raised voices. They're taught with the sound of silence. When the entire room realizes the most powerful person there had been standing quietly among them, waiting for them to see what they refused to look at. And what came next? It wasn't vengeance. It was memory. And Marcus Ellison never forgot. By the time Gina, the hotel's event coordinator, finally emerged from the maze of conference rooms, the lobby had grown noisier, more crowded. Attendees were beginning to trickle in, dressed sharply, their lanyards glinting beneath the soft light of the chandelier. Gina moved quickly, her blazer catching the wind behind her, a folder pressed tightly to her chest. When she saw Marcus, she stopped short, her expression shifting from mild confusion to something bordering on alarm. "Mr. Ellison?" she asked, her voice laced with nervous surprise. "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. "Oh my God! I wasn't told you'd arrived. She faltered, glancing toward the front desk, where the receptionist who had turned him away now stood stiffly, eyes downcast. "Please, come with me. The alder room is ready. Everyone's just starting to gather." Marcus didn't respond right away. He simply nodded and followed her, his footsteps echoing softly down the tiled corridor. The walk wasn't long, but each step carried a weight that no one else around him seemed to feel. He passed guests sipping coffee, speakers adjusting microphones, investors greeting each other with confident smiles. None of them knew what had just happened. None of them had seen the welcome, or lack of one, he'd been given. The alder room was stunning. High ceilings, soft lighting, rows of velvet chairs arranged around a central stage. Branded signage stood tall at each corner, proudly bearing the name Crest Tech Summit, and beneath it, powered by Ellison Innovations. Every detail of the space screamed respect, sophistication, power. But the welcome he had received whispered something else entirely. He didn't take the stage. Not yet. Instead, he excused himself and slipped into the side lounge, a small private room reserved for keynote speakers and executives. He closed the door gently behind him and pulled out his phone. He didn't call PR. He didn't call his lawyer. He called Tammy. "Tam," he said, his voice low, controlled. "We're moving the summit." There was a pause. Not a question, not even hesitation. Just breath, then action. "Hayworth Hotel?" she asked. "Yes. Tell them we're pulling every speaker, every investor. I want this entire summit moved before the first cup of coffee gets cold. Cancel the rooms, the catering, every detail. If there are penalties, I'll cover them. Personally." Tammy's voice was steady. "On it." Marcus ended the call and sat for a moment, letting the weight of the morning settle in his chest. He looked around the lounge. A fruit tray sat untouched on a corner table. Leather armchairs lined the wall. The room was designed to impress, but it couldn't unsee what the rest of the building had chosen not to see in him. The knock on the door came quietly. It was Jalen, his operations manager and longtime right hand. "We're good," Jalen said softly. "Tammy's locking down the new venue. I've started pulling our people. No one's making a scene, just smooth, clean exits. Our AV team is already packing up." Marcus nodded. "And the guests?" "They'll know soon enough. I've already whispered to a few of the key investors. We'll make it look like a seamless shift. No drama, no anger. Just movement. Marcus gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. You want me to talk to the board? Jalen asked. I'll do it myself. I want them to hear it from me. He stood, gathered his things, and exited the lounge. Outside, the event was beginning to buzz. Investors chatted by the coffee urns. Attendees scrolled through the conference app on their phones, unaware that their morning plans were dissolving by the second. Marcus walked through the room without announcing himself, without explaining anything. The calm in his stride didn't reveal the storm he was guiding quietly behind the scenes. The front desk had started to notice. Calls were coming in. Room cancellations, catering changes, transport requests. The receptionist who had told Marcus to wait outside now looked panicked, scanning the computer screen, picking up the phone, whispering urgently to the hotel manager. But the wheels were already turning. Within 30 minutes, the once bustling lobby began to thin. Cars were called. Guests, still smiling, assumed this was part of the itinerary, perhaps a scheduled venue tour or breakout session across town. No one complained, no one protested. They simply followed the current Marcus had redirected without ever raising his voice. Back inside the Alder room, the hotel manager finally appeared, face tight, apology folder in hand. Mr. Ellison, he said carefully, I was just made aware of a misunderstanding at the front desk this morning. Please allow me to personally apologize. Marcus looked him in the eye, expression unreadable. You didn't offend me, he said plainly. You disqualified yourselves. The manager blinked. Is there any way we can make this right? You had your chance, Marcus replied, adjusting the strap of his laptop bag. This isn't about ego, it's about standard. And what you showed me this morning is that you have none. He turned, walking past the front desk, past the wide-eyed staff, past the unused coffee trays and untouched fruit platters. As he exited through the same doors he had entered not an hour before, the difference was unmistakable. This time, he didn't wait to be recognized. Because real power isn't loud. It doesn't beg to be seen. It moves with clarity, with quiet precision. And sometimes, it moves entire rooms, entire companies, without making a sound. Marcus Ellison didn't leave because of one woman's mistake. He left because the system that trained her to see someone like him as less than a man in a $5,000 suit and title on every banner was a system he no longer had time for. He didn't shout. He didn't slam doors. He just made sure every door behind him closed for good. And the people left standing inside, they'd be the ones explaining, scrambling, and apologizing for the silence that followed. Julian sat alone for a moment in the makeshift speaker lounge. The air was still, almost too still. His reflection shimmered faintly in the dark glass of the room's window, and behind his own image he could see the evergreen ballroom, the very room he had dreamed up months ago. His vision brought to life. And yet, something inside him had shifted, like a finely tuned instrument knocked just out of pitch. The space no longer felt worthy of the voices it was meant to elevate. He straightened in his chair, fingers steepled, mind whirring with silent intensity. This wasn't about one woman's assumption or a front desk's mishandling. It was about the space, the system that allowed those assumptions to breathe unchecked. Julian didn't need validation, but what he did need, he realized in that quiet moment, was control of the narrative. He pulled out his phone and called Olivia. Cancel it, he said. We're not staying. There was a pause on the other end. The entire summit? Yes, everything. We move it. Today. She didn't push. She didn't even ask why. She understood. Weston Bellevue? She asked. Already contacted the GM. They're ready. I'll start moving everyone. Thank you, Liv. Julian ended the call and stood, a calm resolve settling over him like a tailored coat. He opened the lounge door and walked into the ballroom. His team was there, checking tech, arranging signage, handing out folders. He moved to the center, where Dr. Benson was discussing camera angles with the AV crew. We're relocating, Julian said. Nia turned to him, brow raised. To Bellevue. We delay the opening to give people time. I'm not letting our speakers walk into a space that treats them like they don't belong. She looked at him for a long moment, and then nodded. Good. The decision spread like controlled electricity, quiet, precise, efficient. Olivia took point with logistics, instructing Carter X staff to redirect guests and partners. Jalen worked with transport vendors to dispatch SUVs and private shuttles. Within minutes, QR codes were scanned, emails fired off, text alerts sent to every registered attendee, venue change, new location, Westin Bellevue Grand Hall. There was no panic, no chaos, only motion. Julian remained centered in the storm, hands clasped behind his back, watching his team execute a pivot that would have sent most corporations scrambling. But Carter X wasn't most companies. They'd been forged in rooms where they weren't expected. Built through grit, not inheritance. Adaptation wasn't new. It was instinct. The hotel manager approached with a strained smile, clipboard in hand. Mr. Carter, I just wanted to again express our sincerest apologies for earlier. The misunderstanding. Julian cut him off without malice, just certainty. This isn't about a misunderstanding. It's about what you chose not to see. I can assure you, our staff will undergo additional training. We're happy to offer complimentary upgrades, even host an apology reception. Julian shook his head. Respect isn't something you give after a mistake. It's something you practice before one happens. The man faltered. Look around, Julian said, gesturing to the ballroom, where staff were now quietly disassembling signage, rolling up branded backdrops, unplugging microphones. We brought 80 of the most influential minds in tech into your space, but you couldn't recognize the person who brought them here. The hotel manager took a breath, like he wanted to say more. But there was nothing left to say. Julian turned and walked away. By the time he reached the lobby, half the attendees had already departed. Bellhop stood idle, luggage untouched. Catering staff huddled near rolling carts of untouched hors d'oeuvres. Conference registration booths sat vacant, the branded lanyards still neatly laid out in alphabetical rows. Souvenirs of an event that never truly began. But elsewhere, it was coming to life. Julian stepped into a waiting SUV and rode in silence toward Bellevue. His phone buzzed again. Olivia, confirming that the ballroom at the Westin was already being prepped. Signage reprinted, AV reinstalled. Dr. Benson had volunteered to personally greet arriving guests. Jalen had arranged refreshments. They were rebuilding the summit, piece by piece, in less than 90 minutes. When the SUV pulled up in front of the Westin, Julian stepped out and was greeted instantly, not by hesitation, but by recognition. A uniformed concierge opened the door before he reached it. Mr. Carter, welcome. We've prepared your suite, and the grand hall is being finalized as we speak. May I escort you directly? Julian smiled, grateful, but not surprised. Respect here wasn't a favor. It was protocol. As he entered the hotel, his mind flicked back to Terralux for only a moment, not with bitterness, but with clarity. That morning had offered him a choice. Swallow the slight and proceed, or stand firm in his own worth. He had chosen the latter. And now, the story he was writing would echo far beyond conference walls. Not just a keynote or a headline, but a statement, carved in silence. Because power isn't always loud. It doesn't need to shout to be felt. Sometimes it moves without anger. Sometimes it simply packs up and leaves. Julian Carter didn't need a press conference to make a statement. He didn't raise his voice or storm out of the Terralux Hotel in a cloud of confrontation. He simply redirected the summit and with it, the entire energy of the day. But what he didn't know, not yet anyway, was how far the ripples from that choice would travel. By the time the last Carter X shuttle rolled away from Terralux's marble awning, the air inside the hotel lobby had turned cold with confusion. The front desk buzzed with hurried conversations. Event signage still stood proudly in its frame. But beneath it, the conference check-in desk was vacant, and the branded lanyards remained untouched. Even the catering team, confused by the disappearing crowd, stood in limbo beside trays of croissants no one would ever eat. Is the event canceled? One hotel employee whispered to another. No one said anything. They just left. In the Redwood Room, the now empty ballroom that had been perfectly prepped for the biggest tech summit the hotel had ever hosted, servers stood beside untouched coffee urns, waiting for orders that never came. Back at the Westin Bellevue, however, it was a different world entirely. There, guests were being welcomed with the kind of warmth and recognition that Terralux had failed to extend. The lobby was vibrant with voices, some hurried, some laughing, some quiet with admiration. It wasn't just about switching locations, it was about redefining tone. Julian had created something unexpected, a summit infused with deeper meaning because of the adversity it had to overcome. The grand hall brimmed with conversation. Investors and innovators who had planned to spend the morning in panel discussions now leaned against cocktail tables and asked each other, "Did you hear what happened?" They spoke not with outrage, but with reverence. And when Julian took the stage, the room fell still. "I want to begin today," he said, "by thanking you all. Not for your patience or your adaptability, but for understanding something essential." He paused, his gaze steady, the Carter X logo glowing behind him like a seal of integrity. "This morning, I was reminded that the world still makes assumptions about who belongs where. And when that happens, we each face a choice: to stay silent or to speak. Sometimes not with words, but with decisions." A beat passed. No one moved. "I chose to move this summit not out of anger but out of responsibility. I couldn't stand on a stage where others like me might be made to feel less than. I couldn't ask you to gather in a space where respect had to be earned rather than given." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, sacred even. Then, the applause came. But it wasn't the polite clapping that usually followed corporate remarks. It was full-bodied. It was genuine. It came from the chests of people who had been there, on sidewalks, in boardrooms, in elevators, when the world decided they didn't quite fit. The rest of the day unfolded like a testament to resilience. Panelists spoke with greater candor than expected. Conversations around funding and innovation organically shifted into discussions about equity and power. People listened more intently. They asked different questions. Word spread quickly beyond the walls of the Westin. By mid-afternoon, a senior editor from a national business magazine called Olivia to confirm a rumor. Did Carter really pull the entire summit from Terralux just an hour before kickoff? By the next morning, headlines bloomed across tech publications and DEI newsletters alike. One post went viral. A side-by-side image of the empty Terralux ballroom next to a packed Westin conference room, captioned simply, "Respect is the room." But the most meaningful conversations didn't happen on social media. At a quiet lunch table tucked in the corner of the Westin's restaurant, two black founders from Detroit sat across from each other, having met only that morning. "You ever had to explain your own resume in a room full of people already calling you lucky?" one asked. The other nodded. "Yeah. I used to think if I dressed sharp enough, worked twice as hard, it'd stop. But Julian reminded me, respect isn't earned through exhaustion, it's a right." They toasted water glasses to choosing dignity. Elsewhere in the city, the management team at Terralux tried to get ahead of the storm. An internal memo circulated, urging staff not to comment publicly. But the damage was done, and not because Julian had called for a boycott or demanded headlines. He hadn't said anything, in fact. That was what made it louder. Clients began to ask questions. 3 major tech firms quietly canceled their upcoming events. One well-known venture firm removed Terralux from its vendor list entirely. The hotel's director of sales reached out to Carter X within 48 hours, offering upgraded suites, a formal apology, and a donation to a local equity nonprofit. Olivia didn't even forward the email. She knew better. Meanwhile, Julian kept building. He spent the next week not on press tours, but in internal meetings with his team, using the summit's disruption as a case study. They rewrote their vendor contracts to include language around bias prevention. He introduced a clause requiring that all Carter X partners attend quarterly inclusivity briefings. He didn't shout about these changes, he implemented them. Because real leadership isn't performative. A week later, Julian received a handwritten letter. It was from a college senior in Atlanta, a computer science major at a historically black university. I watched the footage of your summit shift, the letter read. It wasn't just powerful, it was healing. For people like me who wonder if we'll ever belong in the rooms we're building toward, you showed us that maybe the problem isn't us. Maybe it's the rooms, and maybe we get to build better ones. Julian folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of his desk. No spotlight needed. No victory dance. He hadn't done it to inspire headlines. He'd done it because in that moment, it was the only move that felt true. And that truth, quiet, measured, unwavering, was speaking louder than ever. Julian Carter didn't intend to spark a movement. All he wanted that morning was to welcome his guests with grace and deliver a message that mattered. But sometimes, the way history finds us isn't in the moments we plan. It's in the ones we refuse to ignore. 2 weeks after the North Star Tech Forum wrapped, Julian was back in his office overlooking downtown Seattle. The glass walls reflected the winter light, pale and still. But inside, his team buzzed with energy. The momentum they'd gained from the summit had turned into something bigger. Investor inquiries had nearly doubled. A handful of publications had quietly updated their top 50 CEOs to watch lists to include his name. But that wasn't what stayed on Julian's mind. What stayed with him were the emails, hundreds of them, from young professionals, entrepreneurs, even hotel staff from other cities. People who had seen the viral posts, heard snippets of his opening speech, or caught wind of the story through a friend. One message stood out, a note from a young woman in Kansas City who had just quit her job after being passed over for a promotion again. She wrote, "You showed me that walking away isn't giving up. It's choosing yourself when others refuse to see your worth. Thank you for that." Julian printed it and taped it to the inside of his notebook. That note, and others like it, reminded him of something his father used to say. Dignity isn't just how you stand up, it's how you stand firm. And standing firm was exactly what he intended to do next. At Carter X's next board meeting, Julian introduced a new internal initiative, the Visibility Pledge. It wasn't just another DEI commitment, it was a structural change. It required every Carter X vendor, partner, and service provider to undergo annual cultural competency reviews. It provided a budget for community-sourced feedback on how their teams treated clients from underrepresented backgrounds. And it gave employees a formal pathway to report moments of unconscious bias without fear of retaliation. Some board members raised eyebrows, others pushed back, worried about cost, optics, scalability. Julian didn't flinch. "We talk about disruption in tech all the time," he told them. "This is disruption too, but of a system that's been running unchecked for decades." They passed the measure unanimously. At industry conferences, Julian started speaking less about product innovation and more about people. His breakout sessions shifted from panels about scalable algorithms to workshops on leadership ethics. He launched a podcast series called The Quiet Room, where executives and employees shared stories about the micro moments that shaped them, the moments when someone either made space for them or tried to erase them. One of the first guests was Dr. Nia Benson. She shared her earliest memory of being mistaken for an intern at a neuroscience conference, despite having more credentials than half the room. "Julian," she said during their conversation, "the moment you walked out of that hotel and didn't look back, it wasn't just brave. It was blueprint. You gave people a roadmap." Julian smiled. Not because he agreed, but because she'd named what he couldn't. This was never about revenge. It was about clarity. Clarity about who he was, and who he refused to become. Months later, Julian was invited to deliver the commencement address at his alma mater, Georgia Tech. He hadn't walked that campus in years, but as he stood before thousands of fresh graduates in their black robes and bright eyes, he felt a deep and anchoring emotion. "I won't tell you the world is always fair," he said into the mic, "because it's not. I won't promise that hard work is always enough, because sometimes it won't be." He paused, letting the air settle. "But I will tell you this. No matter how many times you're told to wait outside, to prove yourself, to shrink in order to fit someone else's vision of success, don't. Don't wait. Don't beg. Don't perform. A hush fell over the stadium. Instead, build. Build your work. Build your values. Build your name. And if they still don't open the door for you, build a different room. The students rose to their feet. But it wasn't the thunder of applause that Julian heard. It was the echo of possibility. Back in Seattle, the Terralux Hotel was still recovering from its misstep. The PR team had done its rounds. Management had rotated. A few former employees reached out to Carter X to thank them for how professionally the situation had been handled. But Julian never returned. Not out of bitterness, but because some spaces aren't meant to be revisited. Some lessons don't need a sequel. And while the press eventually moved on, the industry didn't. At a private leadership dinner in San Francisco 6 months later, one of Julian's peers leaned over a glass of Cabernet and whispered, "You know, that move you made, that wasn't just about principle. It changed how we all do business." Julian nodded once, gently. But the truth was, he hadn't done it for them. He did it for the kid who used to sit in the back of the class and pretend he wasn't hurt by being overlooked. For the intern who carries a badge but not a name. For the future leaders watching quietly, wondering if it's possible to rise without ever having to fold. He did it for them, because leadership, at its best, isn't about power, it's about presence. And presence, when rooted in truth, can do what shouting never could. It can transform a moment of dismissal into a movement of dignity. It can turn silence into momentum. It can, quite literally, shut down the room and still leave the door open for others to walk through. Not because you demand respect, but because you show them how to claim it. Julian Carter's story isn't just a tale about a tech CEO being misjudged, it's a mirror. A mirror that reflects what so many have felt but couldn't always name. It's about what happens when assumption overshadows achievement, when presence is met with prejudice, and when silence is mistaken for insignificance. But more than that, it's a masterclass in grace under fire. From the moment Julian stepped onto the sidewalk in front of the Terralux Hotel, to the second he stood before a crowd of top executives at a new venue just hours later, he carried with him more than a keynote address. He carried a message, one that didn't need to be shouted to echo across boardrooms, newsrooms, and living rooms alike. He had prepared to host an industry-shaping event. What he wasn't prepared for, at least not explicitly, was to be reminded, in a matter-of-fact tone, that for some people, his appearance would always speak louder than his resume. The mistake wasn't just the front desk agents. It was systemic, subtle, and quietly damning. A reminder that for Black professionals, no amount of wealth, success, or polish is ever quite enough to guarantee respect. And yet Julian didn't erupt. He didn't demand headlines. He didn't post an angry thread on social media. Instead, he led with the very thing that power sometimes fears most: calm certainty. He didn't ask for recognition. He relocated the entire summit. Not to punish, but to make a point. And in doing so, he sent a clear message to everyone watching. When someone questions your value, you don't need to shout your worth. You show it. The consequences of his quiet stand spread quickly. Not because Julian fought for attention, but because he allowed the truth to do what truth always does when given space. It resonated. It rippled. It made people sit up straighter, question longer, and reconsider what leadership actually looks like. Because let's be honest, how many times have we seen the opposite? Moments where people with power choose comfort over confrontation, optics over authenticity. Julian didn't just move the summit. He moved the standard. And in the days that followed, something remarkable happened. Conversations that had been quietly avoided for years began surfacing in tech firms, law offices, universities, and homes. People began sharing their own lobby moments, times when they were asked to prove themselves before they'd even been allowed in the room. Julian's decision gave language to a feeling many had carried for far too long, and he did it without ever raising his voice. There's a profound lesson in that. Not all power is loud, and not all silence is weakness. Julian's story teaches us that dignity can be disruptive. That walking away, when done with conviction, isn't retreat, it's revolution. It reminds us that we don't always need to dismantle the building brick by brick. Sometimes the most radical act is simply choosing not to stay in the room. But here's the real challenge. For you, for me, for all of us. What do we do with stories like this? Do we file them away as inspiring anecdotes? Or do we let them reshape how we move through the world? Because the truth is, we all occupy rooms, workspaces, social circles, institutions, where someone is always watching. Sometimes that someone is looking for permission. Permission to speak up. Permission to lead. Permission to belong. Julian didn't just claim that permission for himself. He left the door wide open for others to walk through. So how do we apply that to our lives? We start by noticing. We notice the moments when someone's name is mispronounced or left off an email. When someone's idea is overlooked until someone else repeats it. When credentials are questioned, not because they're lacking, but because of who holds them. Then we speak, we advocate, we affirm, we act. Whether you're in a leadership position or just starting your career, understand this. How you respond in those quiet, uncomfortable moments says more about your character than any resume ever will. Like Julian, you may one day be faced with a choice. To stay somewhere that's convenient but unjust, or to choose the harder path of principle. And when that moment comes, remember, real respect isn't requested. It's modeled. It's built into how you walk, how you lead, how you treat people, especially when no one's watching. And if you're someone who's ever been made to feel invisible, know this. You don't need to prove your worth to people committed to misunderstanding it. You don't need to carry the weight of other people's ignorance on your shoulders. You are not their assumption. You are your own authority. The world will not always be fair. But your response to that unfairness can be transformative, not just for yourself, but for everyone who sees you. So the next time you're dismissed, overlooked, or told to wait outside, ask yourself, what room are you building? And who are you making space for? Because that, more than any title, speech, or spotlight, is what defines legacy. Julian Carter may have walked away from a single hotel, but he walked straight into history, into hearts, and into the stories of thousands who now stand a little taller because of him. Let that be the reminder you carry with you. And if this story moved you, if it stirred something inside you that made you think, made you feel, made you remember, then don't let it stop here. Share it. Reflect on it. Talk about it. And if you believe that more people need to hear stories like Julian's, real, powerful, and rooted in truth, then support our channel by hitting that subscribe button. It helps us keep telling these stories that matter. Stories that change minds. Stories that ignite change. Because in a world full of noise, we're here to shine a light on quiet strength, the kind that rewrites the rules without ever raising a fist. And we're just getting started.